This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. First and Last by Hilaire Belloc. Chapter 16. Reality. A couple of generations ago there was a sort of man going mournfully about who complained of the spread of education. He had an ill ease in his mind. He feared that book learning would bring us no good, and he was called a fool for his pains. Not undeservedly, for his thoughts were muddled, and if his heart was good, it was far better than his head. He argued badly, or he merely affirmed, but he had strong allies. Ruskin was one of them, and like every man who is sincere, there was something in what he said. Like every type which is numerous, there was a human feeling behind him, and he was very numerous. Now that he is pretty well extinct, we are beginning to understand what he meant, and what there was to be said for him. The greatest of the French revolutionists was right. After bread, the most crying need of the populace is knowledge. But what knowledge? The truth is that the secondary impressions gathered from books and from maps, are valuable as adjuncts to primary impressions, that is, impressions gathered through the channel of our senses, or what is always almost as good, and sometimes better, the interpreting voice of the living man. For you must allow me the paradox that in some mysterious way the voice and gesture of a living witness always convey something of the real impression he has had, and sometimes convey more than we should have received ourselves from our own sight and hearing of the thing related. Well, I say these secondary impressions are valuable as adjuncts to primary impressions, but when they stand absolute and have hardly any reference to primary impressions, then they may deceive. When they stand not only absolute but clothed with authority, and when they pretend to convince us even against our own experience, they are positively undoing the work which education was meant to do. When we receive them merely as an enlargement of what we know, and make of the unseen things of which we read things in the image of the seen, then they quite distort our appreciation of the world. Consider so simple a thing as a river. A child learns its map, and knows, or thinks it knows, that such and such rivers characterize such and such nations and their territories. Paris stands upon the river Seine, Rome upon the river Tiber, New Orleans on the Mississippi, Toledo upon the river Tagus, and so forth. That child will know one river, the river near his home. He will think all of those other rivers in its image. He will think of the Tagus and the Tiber and the Seine and the Mississippi, and they will all be the river near his home. Then let him travel, and what will he come across? The Seine, if he is from these islands, may not disappoint him or astonish him with a sense of novelty and of ignorance. It will indeed look grander and more majestic, seen from the enormous forest heights above its lower course, than what perhaps he had thought possible in a river. But still it will be a river of water out of which a man can drink, with clear-cut banks and with bridges over it, and with boats that ply up and down. But let him see the Tagus at Toledo, and what he finds is brown, rolling mud, pouring solid after the rains, or sluggish and hardly a river after a long drought. Let him go down the Tiber, down the valley of the Tiber on foot, and he will retain until the last miles an impression of nothing but a turbid mountain torrent mixed with the friable soil in its bed. Let him approach the Mississippi in the most part of its long course, and the novelty will be more striking still. It will not seem to him a river at all, if he be from northern Europe. It will seem a chance flood. He will come to it through marshes and through swamps, crossing a deserted backwater, finding firm land beyond, then coming to further shallow patches of wet, out of which the tree stumps stand, and beyond which again mud heaps and banks and groups of reeds leave undetermined for 100 yards after another the limits of the vast stream. At last, if he has a boat with him, he may make some place where he has a clear view right across to the low trees, tiny from their distance, similarly half swamped upon a further shore, and beyond them a low escarpment of bare earth. That is the Mississippi 9 times out of 10, and to an Englishman who had expected to find from his early reading or his maps a larger Thames, it seems for all the world like a stretch of East Anglian flood, save that it is so much more desolate. The maps are coloured to express the claims of governments. What do they tell you of the social truth? Go on foot or bicycling through the more populated upland belt of Algiers, and discover the curious mixtures of security and war which no map can tell you of, and which none of the geographies make you understand. The excellent roads trodden by men that cannot make a road, the walls as ready loopholed for fighting, the Christian church and the mosque in one town, the necessity for and the hatred of the European, the indescribable difference of the sun, which here, even in winter, has something malignant about it, and strikes as well as warms. The mountains, odd, unlike our mountains. The forests, which stand as it were by hardihood, and seem at war against the influence of dryness, and the desert winds with their trees far apart, and between them no grass, but bare earth alone. So it is with the reality of arms and with the reality of the sea. Too much reading of battles has ever unfitted men for war. Too much talk of the sea is a poison in these great town populations of ours, which know nothing of the sea. Who that knows anything of the sea will claim certitude in connection with it? And yet there is a school which has by this time turned its mechanical system almost into a commonplace upon our lips, and talks of that most perilous thing, the fortunes of a fleet, as though it were a merely numerical and calculable thing. The greatest of armadas may set out and not return. There is one experience of travel and of the physical realities of the world which has been so widely repeated and which men have so constantly verified, that I could mention it as a last example of my theses without fear of misunderstanding. I mean the quality of a great mountain. To one that has never seen a mountain, it may seem a full and fine piece of knowledge to be acquainted with its height in feet exactly, its situation. Nay, many would think themselves learned if they know no more than its conventional name. But the thing itself, the curious sense of its isolation from the common world, of its being the habitation of awe, perhaps the brooding place of a god. I had seen many mountains, I had travelled in many places, and I had read many particular details in the books, and so well noted them upon the maps that I could have redrawn the maps concerning the Cerdagne. None the less, the sight of that wall of the Cerdagne, when it first struck me, coming down the pass from Tourcarol, was as novel as though all my life had been spent upon empty plains. By the map it was 9,000 feet. It might have been 90,000. The wonderment as to what lay beyond, the sense that it was a limit to known things, its savage intangibility, its sheer silence. Nothing but the eye seeing could give one all those things. The old complain that the young will not take advice, but the wisest will tell them that, save blindly and upon authority, the young cannot take it. For most of human and social experience is words to the young, and the reality can come only with the years. The wise complain of the jingo in every country, and properly, for he upsets the plans of statesmen, miscalculates the value of national forces, and may, if he is powerful enough, destroy the true spirit of armies. But the wise would be wiser still if, while they blamed the extravagance of this sort of man, they would recognize that it came from that half-knowledge of mere names and lists which excludes reality. It's maps and newspapers that turn an honest fool into a jingo. It is so again with distance, and it is so with time. Men will not grasp distance unless they have traversed it, or unless it be represented to them vividly by the comparison of great landscapes. Men will not grasp historical time unless the historian shall be at the pains to give them what historians so rarely give the measure of a period in terms of a human life. It is from the secondary impressions, divorced from reality, that a contempt for the past arises, and that the fatal illusion of some gradual process of betterment, of progress, vulgarizes the minds of men and wastes their effort. It is from secondary impressions, divorced from reality, that a society imagines itself diseased when it is healthy, or healthy when it is diseased. And it is from secondary impressions, divorced from reality, that springs the amazing power of the little second-rate public man in those modern machines that think themselves democracies. This last is a power which, luckily, cannot be greatly abused, for the men upon whom it is thrust are not capable even of abuse upon a great scale. It is none the less marvellous in its falsehood. Now you will say at the end of this, since you blame so much the power for distortion and for ill residing in our great towns, in our system of primary education, and in our papers and our books, what remedy can you propose? Why, none, either immediate or mechanical. The best and the greatest remedy is a true philosophy, which shall lead men always to ask themselves what they really know, and in what order of certitude they know it, where authority actually resides, and where it is usurped. But apart from the advent, or rather the recapture, of a true philosophy by a European society, two forces are at work which will always bring reality back, though less swiftly and less whole. The first is the poet, and the second is time. Sooner or later, time brings the empty phrase and the false conclusion up against what is. The empty imaginary looks reality in the face, and the truth at once conquers. In war, a nation learns whether it is strong or no, and how it is strong and how weak. It learns it as well in defeat as in victory. In the long process of human lives, in the succession of generations, the real necessities and nature of a human society destroy any false formula upon which it was attempted to conduct it. Time must always ultimately teach. The poet, in some way, it is difficult to understand unless we admit that he is a seer, is also very powerful as the ally of such an influence. He brings out the inner part of things and presents them to men in such a way that they cannot refuse but must accept it. And how the mere choice and rhythm of words should produce so magical an effect no one has yet been able to comprehend, and least of all the poets themselves. The end of chapter 16.